Hello, my name is Anisha Nagaraj, and this is the explainer video for Chapter 18, Part 2 of the American Pageant. So, in this time period, in 1848 to 1854, there was a lot of sectionalism, and there was the huge issue of slavery. And in the Compromise of 1850, we organized the Mexican Cession Territory. So, America had admitted California as a free state as part of the compromise, and then the rest of the territory was split into the Utah Territory and New Mexico Territory. And both of these were open to slavery on the basis of popular sovereignty. Also, part of the compromise was that slave trade was banned in Washington, D.C., and Texas was allowed $10 million to pay off its debts. Also part of the compromise was the fugitive slave law. And in the fugitive slave law, slaves couldn't testify for themselves and they couldn't have a trial by jury. Northerners could be punished more severely for helping slaves escape. If a fugitive slave was caught and sent back into slavery, the official in charge of their case would receive more money. And instead of increasing slavery, it actually strengthened the abolition movement, because Northerners were so enraged by it. And in this depiction, the artist shows the black freedmen being abused by the Southern white slave owners. And the fugitive slave law really forced the passive Northerners to come face to face with the issue of slavery and pick a side. The Underground Railroad was also occurring at this time. And we can see here Harriet Tubman was leading the black slaves to freedom in the North. And the fugitive slave law kind of aimed to stop the Underground Railroad, but in reality, it made Northerners more sympathetic towards the fugitive slaves. Another event that occurred in this time was the election of 1852. And we can see the political cartoon here depicting Winfield Scott and Franklin Pierce. Winfield Scott on the left was from the Whig Party, and Franklin Pierce on the right was from the Democrat Party. And Franklin Pierce was kind of unknown, and because of this, he didn't have many enemies, so he was able to get votes and gain the presidency. He won the election. However, Winfield Scott was from the Whig Party, and the Whig Party was really divided over the issue of slavery. And some of the votes that would have gone to him actually went to another candidate, John P. Hale, of the Free Soil Party. Also during this time, the American ideals of expansionism were really strengthened by getting the Mexican Cession land in 1848 and the California Gold Rush in 1849. Americans focused their efforts on Central America, and there was talk of building an Isthmian waterway in Central America, which would sever North and South America and would allow for better traveling between the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean. However, whoever controlled the waterway would also have more control over international trade, especially in regards to the US. British interference in this area led to a treaty in 1848 between America and Colombia. And it allowed for the construction of the Isthmian Canal right over here, and as long as America did not try to control it. And in 1850, in the Clayton-Bulwer Treaty, America and Britain promised to not try to control any future Isthmian waterways. The South wanted to capture these new lands in Central America to make them slave states because they had been unsuccessful with the new land coming in North America. So William Walker, who is pictured here, he was a Southerner who declared himself president of the South. He legalized slavery, and he offered Nicaragua to the planters to buy. But he was promptly defeated probably defeated by a coalition of Central American countries. Now, President Polk had wanted to buy Cuba for $100 million, but Spain had refused. And in 1854, three American foreign ministers were telling the American government to demand that it would either buy Cuba from Spain for $120 million or it would wage war for it. And this document was called the Ostend Manifesto. And it was secret, but it was leaked, and the Northerners' anger stopped the Pierce administration from going through with it. This is an example of how issues over slavery stopped the American expansion. In the past, Britain had defeated China in the Opium War, and it had gotten control over 5 Chinese ports and the land of Hong Kong. And America felt threatened by Britain being so close to China because Americans had also established their own trade with China. In 1844, a man by the name of Caleb Cushing traveled to China and gave the Chinese people many gifts. And his purpose was to make the Treaty of Wanghia, as we can see on the right. And it gave Americans accused of a crime in China more rights than they had before. It also improved and increased trade between America and China, and it allowed for more American missions in China. A similar thing happened in Japan. And Japan had become isolationist in the 1600s until the 1850s. And in 1853, Matthew C. Perry, who was on the left, sailed to Japan, and he intimidated, threatened, and shocked the Japanese people. But he gave them many gifts, and he gave them a document requesting trade relations between Japan and America. And he came the next year and had the treaty signed so that these trade relations were established. It was called the Treaty of Kanagawa, and it was established in 1854, since Matthew Perry's first trip was in 1853. And it gave more rights to shipwrecked soldiers, and it established better trade relations with America and Japan. We also had the Gadsden Purchase in 1853, and the newly acquired territories of California and Oregon seemed isolated and unreachable, and the only practical way to travel to those lands was by railroad. But wherever the railroad was constructed, the area would benefit in population and wealth, and the South really wanted the railroad for itself. So the best railroad route would actually run below the border, as you can see over here. This was a previous border of America, and this was where the ideal railroad would run. Sorry about that. So because of this, a man by the name of James Gadsden, over here, negotiated the treaty by which America purchased the strip of land underneath New Mexico, to the south of Mexico, from Spain for $10 million. Northerners had been wanting to expand into Nebraska, but the Southerners in Congress stopped it because these new states would become free states. And so we came to the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, and it was a compromise. Northern Senator Stephen Douglas, on the left, favored having the railroad in the north. So he proposed a deal that the Nebraska Territory would be split into Kansas and Nebraska, with slavery being decided on popular sovereignty in both territories. And it actually repealed the Missouri Compromise of 1850 because it stated that slavery wouldn't go north of the 3630 line, and yet with this Kansas-Nebraska Act, it had the potential to go beyond that 3630 line. And it was strongly opposed by the Northerners, of course, because of the possibility of another slave state. However, it was passed in Congress. This is a political cartoon which depicts how the Northerners felt about the Kansas-Nebraska Act. It is forcing slavery down the throat of a free soiler because Northerners had thought that it was already established that slavery would remain slavery would remain abolished in the northern lands north of the 36 degrees 30 minutes line. And the Kansas-Nebraska Act went against that, and the Northerners were understandably outraged. Thank you for watching, and make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel of Vox News.